Hello everybody and welcome to another multiple ask workflow tutorial with me, Eldarin, from Logicel Lumiere. Today we'll be discussing some production flow tweaks and a little bit of a model cleanup of our DAZ figure in preparation for importing into MotionBuilder. Alright, so let's begin. In our last tutorial, I decided on a nifty little name for our character, called her Testa, based off of testing. Thought that was a little clever. But our folder that we've been saving our files in is called Importing from DAZ. Usually what you'll want to do is you'll want to create a project folder for your project named after whatever your project is, and then in there you'll probably want to create like an assets folder, and within that you'll probably want to put a folder for each of your characters or something like that. What we're going to do here is we're going to go back to the 3D modeling folder here, and we're actually going to create a new folder and call it Testa, which will give us a little bit more of a reasonable name for our character to live in, rather than importing from DAZ, especially since that tutorial was ages ago. Let's go ahead and just drag a selection around all these folders here in Windows Explorer here. Probably do the same thing on the Mac using Finder. You just drag and get a huge whole selection. In most Windows programs, you can also hit Control A to get a full selection as well of all your folders. And we're just going to go ahead and just drag these over and put them in Testa. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and rename the project file for Cinema 4D. I'm going to call it Testa, so that we know what that file is related to. And depending upon the size of your project, you might find that you have a lot of backup files that are taking up a significant amount of space. Mostly because of all those poses, which we're going to take care of in a few moments. These files have blossomed to about 100 megs each, and they're totaling up to like half a gig. It's pretty reasonable to expect that your Cinema 4D files, at least with my characters lately, with all the assets and stuff from various different programs and whatnot, they've blossomed to about 2 gigs. And I'm comfortable with that. But you might find, down the road, when you're looking at your renders and you're looking at some backups and things like that, you may find that your folders blossomed up to like 12, 15 gigs, at which point you might want to come in here, and some of the culprits would be these backup files that you may or may not need anymore, since your file is good to go. There's also going to be some backup folders created by MotionBuilder that I'll show you once that process is over, that you can probably get rid of as well. But we're going to go ahead and dump these. Just right click and do a delete, and those are gone. And now if we went back and we did a right click and checked our properties here, see that we're at a nice, really nice 185 megabytes a sec, 185 megabytes for that folder, which is great. Anyway, we're going to go ahead and double click and open up Testa here. And here in Cinema, we can see that she's back the way she was previously. Same as always. We are having a little bit of an issue though in relation to her textures. If we click on render here, we'll notice that yes, all her textures are missing, and this has a lot to do with the way we stored the textures. Cinema by default likes your texture files in a folder called TEX, but our files were saved as absolute values to an absolute folder here on the F drive. Now that we've reorganized her folder, it can't find those files because they're not in the same folder that they were before. So what we're going to do right here is we're going to do a little bit of a texture cleanup here. We're going to go ahead and find these textures. And the best way to do that would be to go ahead and just look at what the texture was called previously, and then go ahead and find the related texture by clicking on these ellipse dots. But before we do that, let's go ahead and actually do some organization so that this never happens again if we move it to another new folder. So what we're going to do is we're going to first figure out what folder it was using. And right now it looks like it's using FBX, import images, and then all the files are in there. So let's go to FBX, let's go to import images, and then what we're going to do is we're going to control drag like so, and just drop, and we've got a copy. Take that copy, we'll drag it over here to the root folder, the root of the Cinema 4D project. And then what we'll do is we'll just rename this to TEX. And do a refresh here. My Windows Explorer doesn't refresh sometimes, depending upon how long I've been using the computer and different factors. But now we've got a TEX folder that Cinema recognized for all its textures. Great. Come back in here, and what we'll do is we'll go ahead and try to find that file. We'll start with the Rye limbs. So let's go to 3D modeling. Let's go to Testa. Let's go to TEX, and let's look for Rye limbs. Found it, and there we go. That's back. And we'll go to the eyelashes. We'll click on the actual texture itself rather than the ellipses here. Figure out what that texture is called. Rye lashes displacement in this particular case. And we'll find the displacement map. Alright, and if we go back up, I used her displacement map for the color channel, which is interesting. I probably should have used her color channel. So actually I can just correct that right now, and that should take care of that. Let's go ahead and do a few more. We'll see how everything looks once we're done. Okay, this is Rye eyes. So over here we'll find, and what's kind of interesting is since I actually moved that over so I could see it here, now I can kind of see it here while I'm actually picking in the dialogue here, so I can kind of reference in case I forget real quick. My short-term memory isn't exactly as great as it used to be. So and I just don't see the eyes. If it was a snake, it would have bit me. So there's a way to fix this too. We can just do a search here in Windows Explorer, and we can just go ahead and try to find the eyes, and there we go. Bam, we got our eyes, and then this one's probably the exact same texture, but it's just it's being used for a different area of the eye. So come in here, and bam. Still got the search that we did before in there, and this one's probably the same exact texture. Cool. Take that one as well. The cornea is not using a texture. It's purely a refractive map. It's adding refraction to the eyes. The tongue is utilizing a mouth texture. So come in here, and now we'll clear out our search, and we could either go hunt the mouth down. Luckily I found it real quick, or we could just do a search if we can't find it real fast. Okay, on to the next one. This one is her torso. So let's go. We found the torso. The tear duct doesn't have a texture associated with it. The nostril here is probably using, I was going to say the torso, but it looks like she's using the face texture. lips are also probably using the face texture as well. Acromills are using the eye texture. I'm going to type in eye again because I had a real difficulty trying to find the eyes at first. Skin face is probably using the face texture. The fingers is probably using the limbs texture. And there's the limbs. And the sundress is using this SB5 blah 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 sun texture. So if we type in S here, if you come into Windows Explorer and you click once, and this actually, well, it's kind of weird on the Mac. I know on some Macs it's worked for me, on other Macs it hasn't. It's really weird. But if you actually type in the first letter or first couple letters of what you're looking for with one of these clicked, one of your files clicked, it'll immediately jump to whatever letter you typed. In fact, I mean, you literally could actually type out the whole word as long as you do it real fast. Like if I typed in Rye Kiera _ L, it probably would take me actually to the first L in here. I use this usually to get really quickly to the letters that I'm looking for because everything's in alphabetical order. And then at that point, you know, I can just kind of sort of look through and find what I'm looking for. But in this particular case, the S took me immediately to the dress, and actually it's this one we're looking for the color channel. So we are set. Interesting thing to keep in the back of your mind. I don't use them very often, but Daz was very great about actually giving you a heck of a lot more maps than we actually mapped in my first tutorial. For instance, for this dress, I noticed that there was a what appears to be a bump map related to this, related to her torso, related to the dress as well. In the case of her eyes, there's also a bump map. The lashes actually have a displacement map. Though I don't think this is going to be extremely useful to us. However, this face specular map, which gives a nice specular, and this face bump map, which gives the face a nice bump, as well as the torso map that gives a nice bump. This is a really great way, of course, to get you know, the true bump that came out of Daz. We could actually come in to our torso here, and then on the bump map, it actually looks like we're already using the bump map, which is kind of funny. Let's see, we need to replace it, obviously. It's using the torso bump, so let's go in and replace that out, and now we've got the bump map in there just fine. And then in some of these other ones, we also might have extra channels that we didn't realize we were using. For instance, yeah, this one's still using the specular color from the actual specular channel that Daz gave it, Rye Limbs S. So we'll go ahead and find her Limbs S. Rye Limbs Bump, and then the Rye Limbs S. So there you go. Alpha specular, sclera. Let's see, specular color is usually one that has the channel in it, but in this particular case we didn't really use that. We actually got rid of the bump map on all these, but we certainly could add it back in again. We can go ahead here and click on the bump, and in the bump channel we could actually go ahead and actually add our texture that we know represents our bump map from from DAZ, just like so. And we might see that we might get a lot more detail from our DAZ textures that way. Mind you, there is considerable benefits as well to using procedural textures and procedural driven materials in Cinema 4D. You'll possibly get a lot more control and things like that. Alright, so over here, go ahead and let's make sure everything is good here. Make sure we've applied all the materials we need to apply to just about everything. We'll go ahead and add the bump to this as well. And we'll set it to be the eyes bump texture. And for the skin limbs, or no, this is face. Okay, this is the face. Okay, for the face, we added a noise texture to give our face some noise. So we used procedural texturing. However, we might actually have a face bump map that we can use instead for perhaps a more realistic bump. And then for her limbs, of course, Dash should have given us a bump map as well for those. So we go to our limbs, there's our bump map. And we actually have a specular map as well, so let's go ahead and turn on specular color. And we'll go ahead and add the specular for the limbs. And for that matter, for the face, so that's going to be the nostrils and the face itself, we actually already have the specular channel populated. All we need to do is just go ahead and reset our materials. Over here we turned it off, so let's go ahead and add it back in. Let's go ahead and pick our material, and we're going to use the specular from the face. And then for the lip, same thing. We're going to go ahead and pick the specular for the face. And alright, if we go ahead and render now, we hopefully shouldn't see any errors, but we do. Looks like the lashes. Looks like the lashes are missing a texture. And in relation to that, it's because our alpha channel is actually using the displacement texture, if I'm not mistaken. No, it's just using the regular lashes texture. That's interesting. Alright. It's using the regular lashes texture to create a alpha map that basically cuts off these polygons, so that when we render, all we get is just the lashes and not the polygons. That was a pretty important mapping. And as you can see, that's what it does. It just basically leaves the lashes, and it just everything else becomes transparent, even though they're still there. The polygons are still there, but they're transparent, so you can't see them. Alright, and then there was just one more, and it was related to the torso. One of the torso maps is bad. So let's just figure out where. Okay, specular color from the torso is bad. Let's go ahead and add back in the specular from the torso. And just trying to verify, just to make sure. So some DAZ figures come in with a heck of a lot of torsos, a lot of torso skins. This particular figure only came in with one, so we're kind of good. Let's go ahead and render her out and make sure our scene is golden. And yeah, she's looking great as usual with that crazy frown that she got from our facial tutorial from Breakable Proface. Alright, so first things first, we're going to want to go ahead and just go ahead and disconnect the facial animation. We really don't need it currently. Interestingly, and I was going to cover this in a future tutorial where we actually put all this together in Premiere and actually put together an animation, but I'll go over it right now because it's a very interesting technique, and it does have some implications in our MotionBuilder workflow that we're about to discuss. Alright, so right now we've actually got this facial data attached to a null, and the null is through Expresso is driving facial pose morph. As you can see here, we've got all the animation data for that null, and they've all basically got mapping on them. To make this easier on ourselves, what we really would like to do in a movie production pipeline is we would like to be able to have this motion driving this character, but we would like to be able to do it without having to worry about carrying in all of our tags. We'd like to be able to just get rid of this facial animation take, or maybe just have it in another project file, just there or whatever, for future reference if we need to actually recreate the animation for the character. But what we like to do really is we would like to just basically have a tag here or some object here that allows us to just drive it, turn it on, turn it off, and basically drive it at a specific period of time. Right now, in order to drive this animation at a specific period of time, one, we have to bring in the null object with the whole project. Two, we have to remap, or we have to import the mapping of the Expresso. And then three, we have to do this sort of kind of unwieldy movement of keyframes. Which can be kind of silly. So instead, what we're going to do is we're actually going to go ahead and point cache our animation out. That way, we can just have a tag, which is savable, that we can reuse in future animation on this character, and we can basically set a specific time that we want that animation to happen in relation to a timeline in Premiere or an animation timeline here. Alright, so to do that, what we're going to want to do first of all is we're going to want to go ahead and figure out exactly what we need to save animation wise. And the best way I've found to do this is to go ahead and go to our mocap folder. So if we go to test us folder now and we go to mocap, we can see the Breakable Proface capture that we made in our previous tutorial. So we're going to need this WAV file. And what you want to do is you really want to cut this animation here in Cinema based on a time frame of 0. So let's go ahead and alt scroll in, or alt middle click scroll in here, and then use our alt middle click. That was an alt right click to scroll in, by the by, holding right and just moving your mouse. And then we want to alt middle drag here all the way to the beginning of our timeline here. Just make sure that the first frame is on 0. Okay, cool. Then what we want to do is we want to right click and we want to add a special track to this null. We're going to add a soundtrack. Alright, and when we click on sound here in our attributes manager, it'll show that we've got this little soundtrack properties here. And what we can do, we can go ahead and click the ellipses there. We can go to mocap and we can go ahead and add our sound to our mix here in Cinema. And as you can see your sound now. If you hit H to show all selected, which works just as well in this window here, you can actually see what we said on the last tutorial. The reason why I'm doing this is because this is a 3840 frames of animation. We might not necessarily need to save all of this. In fact, saving all this is going to give us an extremely large point cache, you know, and all that stuff has to be stored in memory in Cinema, and depending upon, you know, the amount of RAM you have, that could get kind of hairy. And I just hit space actually, and you know, I'm used to in most of my video editors space actually starting to play the animation, so sorry about that, guys. Let's go ahead and just hit the play button here, which actually the shortcut in Cinema for that actually happens to be F8 instead of space, like every single other audio editing program out there. Yeah, Cinema is not the best audio editing program. This is not the greatest playback in the world here. Let's open up another tool that we have available to us. About we just open up. I want to say we should open up a audio editor, but let's go ahead and open up After Effects actually. What I was trying to do is find a program that actually allows us to really get in quickly and quickly see what frames. We could use Premiere, and ultimately we'll be using Premiere later on in a later tutorial to finish out this animation and to organize everything and get our sound design done. But the great thing about After Effects is you don't have to save the project or anything. You can kind of come in here real quick and you can kind of just drag on this new comp button here, create a new comp, and you can kind of just quickly see what's going on here. The only issue with After Effects, of course, is you're going to have to RAM preview to actually hear the audio versus in Premiere where you can just kind of hear it in real time. But let's go ahead and listen. Take a listen.
And then as I talk to you guys, we'll basically use what I'm saying right now as our current motion capture data. So as you can see, the face comes onto the screen. I've backed away from the connect enough that I get a nice depth.
And then we can use control drag to actually slide through. So let's say that's good. Actually, let's go back a little bit.
And then as I talk to you guys, we'll basically use what I'm saying right now as.
So yeah, we could copy whatever. Anyway, the great thing about After Effects is it gives you this nice little indication right here of what frame you're on, which is important for Cinema since Cinema works in frames. We come back to Cinema here. What I can actually do instead of even doing that for real is just find a nice little break here. And this is great. About 351. Our point cache file is not going to be too large. So that's a nice little break in what I was talking about there. There's a little bit of silence as I'm breathing and preparing to say something else. Okay. So normally in sound design, what we would do, because in a regular voice session, there might be some mess ups, there might be some preparation before it starts, and so you're gonna want to cut all that, and then at the end, there might be a huge pause, either to give the editor later on time to actually be able to cut, or there just might be a long pause as people prepare to take down the recording or whatnot. So with the rest of those keyframes selected, we'll just come in, and what we'll actually do is we'll actually just go ahead and delete. And if we were to minimize this, we could actually have just dragged and deleted everything in summary like so. And we'll come in, and what we'll do is we'll just hold shift, and we'll come in and we'll just select a little bit more, and then actually we really want to get in real close on this keyframe here and make sure we selected everything like so, and then we'll hit delete. And there, what's great about that is we do an H to drag everything into play. We can now see that we've effectively deleted all that we needed to delete here up to this point. And in Cinema, we've used the animation itself as a method to figure out where we needed to cut our audio, in case our audio had some length before or some length after. This is great because then we can go to this direct frame here. We can see it right here. It says 358. And we can come in here and audition, and we can bring our audio in like so. We can double click it and open it up, and in Audition we can use our keyframe panel, or we can use our time panel here to actually go to the direct frame we need to go to, 358 in this particular case. 358 frames turns out to be 11 seconds and 20 or 11 seconds 28 frames. And then what we can do is we can actually go to our selection, and we can set the end of our selection to be the full time frame. And now we can actually hit delete after we select our editor again. Make sure we have yellow around our editor here. Let's drag out the end one more time. So cool, and then make sure we select our editor, and then we can hit delete, and there we go. We've got a clean cut that we know is going to match wherever our animation is. And we can obviously save this cut as test underscore mocap underscore clean underscore final or something like that. Final take, or it could be test underscore, if this was your first scene in your film or a certain scene in your film, you'd be like scene blah 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 underscore clean for a clean audio, the cleaned up, finally finished audio, and final. And I'll actually go into more cleanup and Audition in a later tutorial. But well, actually, let's just go ahead and do some sound design here real quick. What I usually like to do with my audio is I like to get rid of the noise, so we can select the noise here. We can go ahead and do Shift P, and then we can do a Control Shift P. Shift P actually gets the noise print of the audio. Control Shift P will open up your noise reduction panel here, and then I like to take my noise all the way out of the audio. So 100% noise reduction, 100% reduction of reduce the noise and do 100% noise reduction. Then I select the entire file and we'll just hit apply, and that gets rid of the noise. Do that one more time just to make sure that worked. And yeah, that gets rid of the noise, reduces the noise completely out. Alright, and then I'll do a Control A to select the whole entire file, and I'll do an effects, amplitude and compression, and dynamics processing. And your presets might not be set to vocal limiter. By default, I like to go to vocal limiter, and I like to use it to limit my vocals down. And that'll pretty much limit your vocals down to a acceptable range. At this point, you can take this into Premiere with your Final Cut and you know, adjust the audio to match everybody else's audio and things like that. That's pretty much the clean audio. So at this point, I would have saved it as clean audio because the audio is completely clean and it's completely final. All right. So yeah, using Cinema, you were able to get that frame and you were able to actually cut the audio to match the animation. That way, when you render this animation out, you know for sure that the audio is going to be perfectly in sync with the animation. All right. So with all that done, we can actually go ahead and delete the audio track. We don't need it anymore. And then with test to set up correctly now, we can go ahead and change our frame time to 358 frames. So the timeline is perfectly cut for our point cache. Our point cache is basically going to cache as many frames as we tell it to cache here. So if we had that set to 4,000, we would have been waiting for a very long time for it to cache, and things would have just got really ugly memory-wise. All right. So with that set up, all we need to do is go ahead and we can head back home here on the timeline. Although I believe the point cache will actually go home for you automatically. We can go ahead and add a point cache to our mesh, because our mesh is what we're going to want to deform. So it's in the character tags, point cache, and we're going to go ahead and store her initial state, and then we're going to go ahead and calculate the point cache, and it's going to go through and it's going to calculate out everything she's saying over the course of every frame. Okay, and it's done. One thing I noticed as it was calculating was that it stayed on this frozen frame for the good first 100 and some frames of animation, and that has a lot to do with the fact that my face probably was in the camera area during that particular part of the animation. In your recordings and in most live studio recordings, probably usually the actor will probably actually start talking immediately when their face is actually is either in range, or there will be some auditorial cue that will let you know that that's when the animation began, and you need to kind of cut towards that. In our particular case, we didn't have any real indication until after I started actually doing the point cache that craziness and hijinks were about to go on. All right. Anyway, with the point cache saved now, we can actually theoretically break our chains here. So if we go into our Espresso, we actually go ahead and break the chains that bind our character's face to the facial animation. We'll notice something interesting. The character still has facial animation. but her facial animation is not being drove by the pose morphs. In fact, if we were to go ahead and even delete the pose morph tag for giggles right now and delete all the poses, our character still has facial animation. And that's because all her information, all her facial information is actually cached directly in this point cache tag. This is an amazing tool. In a production workflow, and we could even delete this. We could even delete this facial capture. Now we actually have no animation whatsoever on our timeline. Nothing is animated, and yet we still have facial animation. It's all because this point cache tag has stored all the point level animation for her whole entire facial animation. And this is amazing because this tag can actually be stacked with the motion system, which we'll be using for MotionBuilder to store its animations. It can also be blended with other point caches. And 360 frames only took 158 megabytes of memory to store, so it's modestly memory efficient. If you have multiple animations, you're probably going to want to break them up into multiple point caches. You probably get away with maybe even 500 to 1,000 frames of animation. Probably come up to about 500 to a gig memory. But I mean, if you've got like a 12 gig memory machine like myself, you can get away with a lot stored in your point cache. So it's pretty amazing. But for these facial dialogue things, you might not really need to store very much. All right, so let's hit Control Z a couple of times and bring a few things back here. All right, so we brought back our point cache and we brought back our poses. The next thing I want to cover in this tutorial, which is going to be very important for our MotionBuilder workflow. I'm going to go ahead and save her out, is this pose morph tag. Over the course of the month or so after I made the facial animation tutorial and things like that, I've been working on a few 3D projects, 3D animation production workflow projects, and I found that the pose morph tag from DAZ especially really slows things down in cinema. Another thing that's interesting about this pose morph tag is in MotionBuilder, because these poses are stored as absolute poses, even the poses will also get imported into MotionBuilder. Now, a quick way to get around this issue without actually deleting your absolute poses, if you really want to keep those, is to actually go ahead and create a version of Testa. You could probably do it by either doing a save as or save incremental even, but you can create a version of her, and I'm gonna go ahead and call it Testa_MB. This is what I usually use as my convention for my MotionBuilder characters. And for MotionBuilder, you can go ahead and actually disable your pose morph tag so that everything's driven through the pose morphs now. And you could disable, okay, it's unlinked, so that's good. So all we need to do now is just get her back to 0 here. And yeah, you probably can't really tell or notice, but I'm dragging this and it's very slow. Right now it actually froze there for a second. These are very, very, very slow to manipulate. And I think it's mostly because the pose morph tag just has so much poses, so much information to deal with, so much stuff to animate between here. And what I found is, one, for break or pro face, if you're just going to be using just break or pro face, you don't need that. You don't need all these poses. Number two, for a production workflow with soft image, you really don't need any poses at all. And for a production pipeline where you're going to be doing, just a little bit of facial animation, you really actually want to create a much more comprehensive facial rig anyway. You get a lot more control that way. And in a later tutorial, I'll be showing you guys how to actually deconstruct the Daz's facial rig and actually add some interesting control. Because right now, with this facial rig, we have the ability to control the eyes pretty easily. They're weighted really nicely, and they really have really great control already. We can rotate and whatnot. We don't have any controllers though to actually control these in an easier way. We had to open up all the way into the abdomen, so we can create controls for those pretty easily right now if we really wanted to. But the upper jaw and the lower jaw do not give you any control at all over the figure. And this is directly out of Daz. Directly out of Daz, Daz did not map the lower jaw and the upper jaw at all to control the face. The only thing that they control, we actually click on the character and actually rotate up rather than clicking on the viewport and rotating up. The only thing that these control is actually the jaw. That's actually great because it's going to make it very easy for us later to separate those components for soft image, and also weight those components separately in an easy fashion. But for right now, it's not. We don't have any real control over our jaw, and our jaw is not moving our actual head mesh. It's not opening her mouth, and it's not making her talk. And honestly, with the upper jaw and the lower jaw control, that also gets rid of a whole bunch of pose morphs that we need to store in the pose morph tag as well. We no longer need the jaw open, close, jaw in and out, jaw side to side, so we can control those using Espresso with our joint, which gives us incredible control. As it stands right now, what we're going to want to do though, is we're going to want to go to Edit. We're going to want to go to our default Genesis shape. That way we get our default pose back. And then what we're going to want to do is we're just going to want to go ahead and pretty much delete the pose morph tag. And there, she's pretty much frozen now in her default shape. Great. And then what we're going to want to do is we're going to add a new pose morph tag. And for this pose morph tag, we're just going to do only point deformations because we only want to actually have the points move based on our poses. Next, we're going to want to go ahead and delete pose 0. We don't need the free pose that pose morph tag created for us. And then what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to figure out exactly what poses we really need. Now, if we're using a break or pro face workflow, or even if we're using our own workflow where we just animate our controls, we can pull and push vertices and pick some facial poses. But for the most part, assuming a break or pro face workflow, we're gonna need these brow controls. And what we want to do is we actually want to click on the pose morph tag and we want to lock it here so it stays up while we click and manipulate these. And for our break or pro face workflow, what we can do is we can actually go ahead and look at our tested capture here. And we can actually see what we need. So we need inner up, we need the inner ups, we need the inner downs, we need the brow outer ups and outer downs. And working through this myself, I found that for complete and utter control and the ability to be able to later manipulate you know, these individually and create some asymmetrical animation, all we really need is the brow outer down left and brow outer down right here, and I'll show you why. Now when this dialog comes up, this is very important. You want to use relative morph targets this time around instead of absolute morph targets. The reason being, the relative morph targets actually get stored in the pose morph tag itself. They tend to take less memory, according to Cinema 4D's help. And it also means that when you import this into a program like MotionBuilder, there shouldn't be any physical geometry that it has to import underneath your mesh. All of it's stored in the pose morph tag. So it should load faster and there should be less issues. So let's go ahead and hit no for relative pose morphs. And now we've got the brow down and the brow up pose morphs. Or we got the brow outer down, left and right pose morphs here. Now when we go into animate mode, what's interesting is these are at 100% by default. So their default state is going to be down, which is not what we want. We want their default state to be non-effective on the mesh. So whenever you import a pose morph manually like this, make sure you set the strength down to 0 so that they're all good to go. The other thing is, for cleanup purposes, we can now go in, we can actually go ahead and just name our morphs. And we can actually name these in ways that actually mean something to us. You know, not so important for these, but it's going to be important for a few of our morphs later that had some really exotic names. We can name them the same thing that the break or pro face morphs are named, and that way, you know, it's all easy to really map in Expresso. We don't have to take you know, 20 minutes trying to figure out, oh, mouth open is supposed to be jaw open and things like that. All right. We're gonna go ahead and add the brow inners now, and we're gonna go ahead and add those above the brow outers. That way, when we go into our Expresso, we can just quickly see, since it's brow inner ups first anyway, we can see those first in our Expresso. All right. And then what's next? The lip stretch. We didn't have a lip stretch morph created. I believe that's one of those ones that we had to create manually. Alright. So the great thing about doing our own pose morphs is, yes, we can go ahead and just create that manually, and it'll automatically be relative, and we don't have to really worry about looking it up. I guess we can go ahead and do that now. Alright, so for the lip stretch, what you're going to want to come in here and do is go into vertex mode. You're going to want to also add a pose and call it lip stretch L, and in the interest of course having that control, being able to stretch the left or the right lip, I'm going to go ahead and create two morphs here, one for the left and one for the right. Now for the left lip, we're just going to come here real quick with our live selection, and we're going to come over to her mesh, And we're just going to go ahead and select these points here. We're just going to go ahead and just kind of sort of move those out to stretch the face, and then move them in, kind of create like a sort of kind of dimple type thing here. And then we're going to go ahead and with our live selection tool, we're going to unlock this first so that we can actually see the attributes for the live selection tool when we click on it. And we're just going to lower the radius to about 3 here, and we'll use a radius of 3. Actually, we'll lower our radius to 1 actually here in the live selection itself, and we'll use that radius of 1 to actually drag just a little bit more of the actual lip crevice area itself into the lip, recess it a little bit. All right, and then we'll get out of that mode and we'll see what we got. Okay, so if we go back to our pose morph tag, lock it again, we go, that's our lip stretch. And it's a lot smoother now than it was before. The pose morph tag is moving a lot faster. It's almost acceptable now. So we'll hit Control S, go ahead and save our project. And then what we can do is we can actually use some mirroring techniques to go ahead and actually mirror this over instead of having to recreate the pose morph. So what we'll do is we'll copy the pose morph, and we'll go ahead and paste it back in. That'll create a duplicate. We'll call this right. And then all we need to do with the right pose morph is go ahead and just do a flip X. All right, and what we should see is that now it has flipped perfectly over to the right hand side. Amazing. So there we go. That's our lip stretch. So that was easy. Let's go ahead and do the lip kiss now. Go to our poses, and lip kiss was not called lip kiss here in the poses, as you recall. It was called a lip pucker pose. Let me go ahead and drag that in. Add it as a relative morph. And this time, what we can do instead is we can rename it so we know what it is for ourselves. You know, we don't want that to be a lip pucker. This is a lip kiss. And there we go. Alright, and then we have our lips corners up and lips corners down poses. Now, this pose morph here, the mouth corner up and down pose, we happen to have, if we go from 100 to, or 0 to 100%, we have a mouth up pose. But we need the mouth to go down. The best way to do that, of course, is to use negative 100%. And in fact, in our espresso, in our previous tutorial, we drove our animation that way. But what if we want to make this easier for ourselves? What if we just want to have a mouth corner down animation with its own morph? You know, for extra control, and so that we don't have to do some weird pose morph mapping like we had to do in the previous tutorial. Well, first of all, let's go ahead and call this lip corners up, because this is a lip corner up animation. Cool. Alright, and so the best way I've found to do this is to take the morph as we want it. So basically bring this to negative 100%. And yeah, we should get a situation where she's frowning. And then if we go ahead and actually copy the mesh, and then delete the pose morph tag on the new mesh, as well as every single other tag on it, we should be faced with a situation now where our first tag, our first mesh, should still have the pose morph, and should be just fine. In fact, we can still access everything. It's perfectly fine. But our second mesh is stuck in this frown state. And we can go ahead and actually delete its poses and delete its skin deformer. And it's pretty much stuck in it. It's stuck in its state. Now we can call this lip corner down. And we can actually use this absolute pose as one of the poses for our pose morph tag. So if we go ahead and add that as a relative pose there, and we go ahead and rename that like so, and then we go ahead and finally delete this pose now, and then re-enable our mesh, we should see that now we've effectively got our lip up and our lip down poses. Excellent. Now the rest of the poses are already a part of the DAZ suite of poses that were brought in automatically, so we can go ahead and just continue to add those. Upper lip up, is going to be a part of our lip poses that got brought in. It's going to be lip top up and left and right. You can go ahead and drag those in there and make them relative. And we've got the lip top downs, which we can drag in as well and make them relative. And then normally we would have jaw controls, and we use Expressor to drive the jaw controls to open up the mouth, but in this particular case we can go ahead and use the DAZ poses real quick. It's not going to hurt our memory entirely too much, but as soon as we get our facial rigging done, we're definitely going to want to go ahead and get rid of that pose morph, since it doesn't really give us as much control as we would like. Alright, so we can actually call this one jaw open. We can call this one upper. Well, let's go ahead and hit Control Z because I kind of forgot which one was right, which one was wrong. Okay, this one's left, so I'm gonna go ahead and keep the L. We'll call this upper lip. Down, left. We'll go ahead and select all this and copy it so that we can use it as a basis for our upper lip down right. And this one is upper lip up. We'll get rid of the down there, and then we'll use the same thing for this one. So we'll keep the up, we'll drag, delete that, and then we'll delete the down. And now we are set to go with all our pose morphs. Alright, so all we need to do now is just go ahead and do some cleanup here. Make sure they're all set to 0, so that when we go into animation mode, they'll all be 0. Beautiful. And that's our pose morph cleanup. And then what we can do now is we can actually go ahead and delete the poses if we wanted to. However, those poses are kind of golden, and it's nice to have them here. We may or may not need them again. So what you could do is you could save another copy of this file, and I like to call this copy test to edit, or whatever your character name is in edit. And this can basically be your editor copy. This is your copy of the file with all your editor friendly controls and capabilities and stuff like that that you might need for for prepping your file in case you have to do some certain animation. You might want to have all your stuff in here. And then once you're ready to actually use your file or whatever, the file that you're going to be importing into your projects or using as an XREF for your projects, you're going to want to go ahead and delete the pose morphs so that they're not taking up that much memory. We'll probably want to get rid of the HDR sky, the floor, and any extra facial capture stuff that we just do not need. So now we have a clean file that has just the animations that we saved in point caches, and it just has just the character in T-pose. And this file we can use and save as our actual testa file, for import into whatever program we want, because it's clean. And in this process also, getting rid of, if you're saving this file for MotionBuilder, getting rid of the poses and just having a clean skeleton hierarchy with the mesh and the dressed would have been perfectly fine for MotionBuilder. So this file is also great for MotionBuilder. So let's go ahead and save this as testa m. Well, in this particular case, the testa file is good, so we really don't need the testa MB anymore. And in fact, we can go ahead and actually go into testa herself, the folder, and we can go ahead and delete testa MB. This is taking up space, and hit refresh, and yeah, the file's gone. Cool. Plus we can get rid of the testa MB backups. We don't need those as well. They're just taking up an extra 100 megabytes of space per each. And we're good to go. What we need to do now for MotionBuilder is to save this as an FBX for exporting to MotionBuilder. So let's go ahead and do a export to FBX. In our FBX folder that we created to hold our FBX files, we're going to call this one testa_MB, MB for MotionBuilder, and this will be our base file for MotionBuilder purposes. We can leave textures and materials checked, although I found that MotionBuilder really doesn't do a very good job of importing my materials, whether I have it checked or not, so it kind of sort of doesn't really matter. It may have something to do with this embed textures into the FBX. I'm going to go ahead and uncheck that and see if that helps us out. And then of course we want to save it as, we do not want to save as ASCII, because as you remember from my previous tutorial, ASCII file is just plain text, and that really blows up the FBX format. Just blossoms, and it's just going to be a nightmare for our hard drive. So just leave it alone as is, and we'll go ahead and hit save, and we've basically exported out our FBX with our current hierarchy, and it's ready for MotionBuilder. So let's go ahead and open that up.